George Dom, welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast. I'm so stoked that you're here today.
Thanks very much, DJ. My pleasure to be with you.
I'm extremely fascinated by your background. I've had a chance ever since getting you to come on the show here today. I've been researching the heck out of you. I've been reading your book. It's a phenomenal book, The Five Pillars of High Trust Leadership. I've also been watching a lot of documentaries on the Blue Angels, so I know a little bit about what you guys do. I'm here to learn a lot more, of course, but for my listeners that perhaps aren't as familiar, can you walk us through what are the Blue Angels? What does it look like? What do we need to know before we dive into a little bit deeper of the nuances?
Yeah. So the Blue Angels got started way back in 1946, coming out of World War II, when there was this new evolution in America's military might for the Navy, and that was flying fighters off of aircraft carriers. And after the war, the Chief of Naval Operations instructed Lieutenant Commander Butch Voris to stand up a flight demonstration team to travel around the country to show the American public what this new capability was and to inspire young people to consider signing up and serving their country. So that's in essence what the squadron's been doing ever since. And so they the show season is from mid-March to mid-November, and they'll do roughly 35 cities, traveling around the country, putting on flight demonstrations and meeting with high school students and so forth, just trying to get the message out and to show the American public what's possible whenever you are uncompromising in your commitment to excellence and precision.
So walk me through what could somebody expect at a Blue Angels show? I just looked up the schedule. You guys are coming to Duluth. I'm in Minnesota, Duluth in July. I want to go. What can I expect when I come to the show?
Right. So you come to the show, and of course, there'll be many other aviation acts that are going on. And typically, the Blue Angels will fly as the last performance of the air show in the afternoon, roughly around 3 o'clock, something like that. And what you're going to see is an amazing demonstration of teamwork and precision, both on the ground and in the air, and the interaction between the pilots and their ground crews. And there's 6 jets involved in the demonstration. They're flying the Navy's F-18E, the Super Hornet, and the pilots will march down and they'll man up their jets and then taxi out in formation. They'll take off, and the beginning of the show involves two separate entities. First is the Diamond Formation, Blue Angels number 1 through 4, and their objective is to show the public extreme teamwork. 4 pilots flying as one for 40 minutes. Then Blue Angels number 5 and 6 will show the maximum performance capabilities of these amazing fighters. So sometimes pulling up to 7.5 Gs positive and sometimes -3 Gs negative as they do opposing maneuvers. And so they alternate between the diamond and then the solos for the first 2/3 of the show. And then Blue Angels 5 and 6 will join up on the diamond, and now they have the 6 plane delta formation, and they will do about 4 or 5 maneuvers with all 6 jets together, flying literally a couple feet apart at 3, 4, 500 miles an hour, doing three-dimensional aerobatics at very low altitude, so the people can see and take pride in the representation of the professionalism that's out there in naval aviation today.
Well, that's amazing. I got to ask selfishly, I'm a big Top Gun fan. I like both the first one and the second one. Love the movie. It's one of my family's favorite movies. Where does Top Gun rank when it comes to their relationship with the Blue Angels? Is there any relationship there? What's the difference? What do we need to know?
Right. So Top Gun started in the midst of the Vietnam War, and that was because we found that our performance in the air-to-air arena was not what it had traditionally been in previous conflicts. And so they did a big study, and one of them was we needed to really upgrade our training. And so that's where Top Gun came along, was to have an elite center of excellence for tactical air combat and to then train the trainers that would then go out and then train their squadrons. And upon the development of Top Gun, the Navy Fighter Weapons School is the official name of it. Our performance went way up, 400 or 500%. So that's the origin. There's a lot of overlap and so forth. For example, I was an instructor at Top Gun for 3 years after going through as a student. And so there are Blue Angels. In fact, the team right now, I want to say, has at least three Top Gun graduates and a couple instructors there. So it's a small club and there's some overlap. But I'm glad you enjoyed the movies. I thought they were both of them were great. Although we realized that they weren't going to be documentaries, but there are just some wonderful scenes in there that reflect the intensity and are very realistic with the flying scenes.
There's rumors that there's a third one out. Who knows? Maybe you'll be invited to be on the third show of Top Gun #3. That'd be pretty awesome.
Well, that'd be like what was the movie years ago where all the old astronauts came back to save the world by getting on
Exactly.
the shuttle again, one more time. We have a saying in the Navy that you can't be as good as you once were, but you can be as good once as you always were. So maybe we'll see.
Hey man, Tom Cruise, if you're listening, call George Dom. He's ready to step in.
Let's
I'm
go.
curious. I'm curious here. What do you think are the keys when selecting a Blue Angel player or pilot? I don't know the term that you guys use, but what are you guys looking for as far as maybe during the interview process? How do you select the right people?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, obviously, we require certain amount of experience. If you're going to be the wingman with the Blue Angels, you have to have accumulated 1,250 tactical jet hours flying off of aircraft carriers. So that sort of gets you in the door. You need to have references and recommendations from your commanding officer and anybody else of significance who can help tell your story about who you are. And then the applicants will then come and visit with the team during the first few months of the air show season so that everybody can get acquainted and so forth. And then in June, when the team's doing its mid-season show in Pensacola Beach, in Florida, which is where the team resides, they'll lock themselves in a room and they will figure out who's going to be joining the team for the next year. Because each year, at least for the pilots, it's a 2-year assignment. So when you see the team fly, realize three are in their first year and three are in their second year. So 50% turnover each year. So to your question, though, what are the qualities they're looking for? Um, Obviously, you have to be a really good pilot, but because you're in the public eye and you are representing, the hundreds of thousands of men and women that are on active duty out on the front lines of freedom, you've got to be able to be the type of person who interacts well with the public and can tell their story, right? So that's a piece of it. Um, because the team is so close, they're on the road nearly 300 days of the year. So there's a chemistry thing. I mean, you have to be somebody who is a team player who gets along well with other people and all of that. And then finally, when we get down to the very last, you got two or three people who are just really good, and you got to pick, right? And then, so the fundamental question that gets asked is, okay, which person here will come to work every day and accept continuous, constructive, positive feedback and criticism in order to continually to raise your performance day after day after day, because that's what the team is all about. They're never satisfied that they've got it figured out. And so each week they're trying to get better and better and better. So it's really interesting. If you went to a Blue Angel Air Show at their first show in the middle of March, you would see a Blue Angel Air Show and it would be really good. But if you had a discerning eye and you saw them later in the season, say around September, October, um, you could discern that the formations are closer, the altitudes are lower, and the show is shorter because they're able to be more aggressive at coming back around to set up for the very next maneuver. So it's really pretty cool.
And there's a lot in there. So when we're looking at potential Blue Angel pilots, there's this kind of this trust and there's also this talent piece. Would you rather have somebody that's high trust, a little lower talent, and hey, I can teach you some of the nuances? Or would you rather have somebody that's, hey, really high talent? I mean, this is kind of the Top Gun theme here, right? Really high talent. I don't know if I trust you yet. If you kind of had to waver which side is a little bit more coachable, easy to work with, where would you go and how would you go about that?
Yeah, so in my book where I talk about these five pillars of high trust, I put competence third. The five of them are character, commitment, competence, connection, communication. And they're all important. You have to have all five to build a high trust relationship, a high trust team. But I put competence third for a reason, because as you just touched on, um, it's absolutely important, no question about it. But if you don't get the first two, the character piece, if you don't walk your talk, if you don't live our shared values, and you aren't all in committed, then the third one doesn't really matter. And we see this all the time in business and in sports and so forth, where you have an extremely talented person, but they're just toxic on the team, or they're just indifferent, right? They just don't care about supporting their teammates, and so uh, and that then limits what you can accomplish. So that's how we would come down on it. I mean, because if you get the first two, if somebody walks our talk and they are all in, we can teach them, what they need to know in order to perform at the level that they need.
How do you sniff that out in an interview process? I would imagine that the interview process probably just isn't one day or one sit down, but I mean, I would assume it's probably not also very long. How do you sniff that out?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, the interview process, at least formally at the end when we bring them in person to Pensacola, it's a week-long process of interviews and so forth. But interestingly enough, for the pilots, there's no flight test or anything like that, because we figure anybody could have a bad flight. It wouldn't be reflective of their. And we're also have the benefit that when you go on a 6, 7, 8 month deployment on the aircraft carrier, there's no secrets. You get to know people really, really well. So that while there were some applicants that I didn't know personally, I knew somebody that I trusted who had deployed with them, and they could give me what their read was. And because we are so intent on, we grade every carrier landing, we debrief after every flight. You can tell whether what their manner is, how receptive they are to criticism, and how committed they are to self-improvement day after day after day. So we get a pretty good read on it. Now, here's an interesting thing that your listeners may find is that when we pick the new people for the team, and we may not just be picking pilots, we're also picking maintenance officer, flight surgeon, um, logistics officer, and so forth. And they're all competing against other people in the community who've applied for a position on the team. And so we have 16 officers on the team. And when we lock the door and go in to decide who we're picking for next year, everybody gets a vote. And the vote has to be unanimous to pick a new member of the team. So effectively, each person on the team, regardless of their position, has a veto card, a figurative veto card. And if they say, I don't want this person on my team, and this could be, the maintenance officer about one of the pilots. I mean, it doesn't matter. We're all Blue Angels, right? So if they play the card that they don't want that person on their team, they're gone. They're not going to be on the team. Now, the culture is that you don't play that card unless you really mean it, and you have to say why you don't want the person on the team, but you don't have to persuade anybody else. And it's funny. As the leader of the team, uh, I thought I knew both years that we did our selections for the next year that I knew who was going to get picked. I had a pretty strong feelings about who I thought the people I thought got blown out of the water fairly early because you can fool the old man, but but you can't fool the young junior wingmen and the junior officers. So it's and here's the real power of that process is that when you go through this experience, regardless of what role, and everybody shares the same experience, and that is at some point along the way, particularly early on in the training, you go, I don't know if I can do this. I mean, because I'm having to perform at a level that day to day to day consistently that I've never had to do before. And I'm not sure I can do this. And but when you know that everybody there wanted you there,
Mm.
that really helps you dig down a little bit deeper because that's what you got to do in order to be able to get to the next level of performance. And similarly, because this was a unanimous pick. It wasn't the leader's selection. It wasn't the hiring manager's pick. This is our teammate. And if somebody's struggling, everybody feels, hey, we got to do whatever we can to help this person succeed. Now, no selection process is perfect. And we've had over coming up, this was the 78th year the team's been flying. There have been people that didn't quite measure up, but very rare. I've shared this process, and I had one bank department from back when Wachovia Bank was a thing. They tried this, and they said it supercharged their performance and the morale on their team because of it just gives everybody such a sense of ownership and camaraderie.
So two big lessons I learned there, George. First was that everyone on the team has a voice. I think it's a powerful lesson for my listeners. Another one is that I think it's just fascinating that there's no in-air test. I mean, hey, I'm going to trust your ability. I've heard what you can do. I'm more interested in how can you converse? What's your commitment level like? What's your EQ like? What you're telling me in one way is that side is just as important, if not more important. Those are two really big lessons thus far. Let's keep this thing going. I'm a big believer, George, that the best athletes, coaches, parents, anybody, those people that have a strong mindset on this earth, I think that they do two things really well. They see failure as feedback and they seek out feedback without pushback. They seek out feedback without pushback. You've mentioned this a few times. Can you go into detail about your debrief process as a high performing Blue Angel team? I've heard this phrase, I'm glad to be here. Walk me through what it looks like. Like, take me inside the room of what it looks like.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, it is sacred that we're going to do a debrief after every flight. There's no excuse, and there's always a reason not to have one, right? And but this comes first. Everything else can wait until we debrief the flight. Actually, there is one flight that we don't debrief, and that's the very last flight of the air show season because that's the end for that particular team, and half the members of the team are going to change for the next season. So while we don't formally debrief it, I guarantee you everybody looks at the videotape just to see how it all went and so forth. I mean, it just becomes a habit. It becomes something that is just part of here's who we are and here's how we do things. So the way the debrief operates is first of all, we gather in the conference room or wherever we're going to do the debrief. And the only people allowed in the room are people who were actually involved in the flight, whether it was in the air or on the ground, because we have, like, for example, the flight surgeon is grading the air show, the maintenance officers at center point with the FAA and responsible for managing anything that's going on the ground. We have a representative up in the tower and so forth. So we have a variety of people, and no one person knows exactly what happened throughout the flight, right? And so we gather in the room together, but we don't want friends, we don't want family, we don't want any distractions, and we don't want anybody holding back on expressing their concerns or their questions or whatever because they don't know who this person is over here or whatever. We want to have absolute candor in the debrief. And we effectively take off our rank when we walk into the room. I mean, I, as the leader, was, more senior to the other people, but I had to be willing to accept their input and constructive criticism, no matter what. I had to learn from them. So that sort of sets the stage for it. Now, the leader starts the debrief and sets the example, and will make a few general comments about how the flight went from his or her perspective, and then is expected to confess, if you will, if made any significant mistakes during the practice flight, the training flight, or the air show demonstration. This does a couple things that are really important for us that opens the window to having a candid debrief. Number one is it gives the wingman a very good idea of how how aware I am of my performance. Because if I'm making a mistake and I don't know it, we need to talk about that. And if I'm making a mistake and I won't admit it, we got another problem we need to talk about. So if I will make a list of whatever significant mistakes I made as a leader, um, and then will go around the room, and everybody in the room that was involved is going to share if there's something that they a significant mistake, uh, and that's pretty cool. That really opens up, uh, and you've got this figured out. You've got the level of trust in the room. Whenever somebody will confess to a mistake that they made that nobody else would have known,
Mm.
except that they shared it. And why did they share it? Because they want their teammates to learn from it so we can all get better from it.
So just
So
to
that,
clarify, this is
sure,
happening before you guys hop on and look at the film or you watch anything. The first thing is I'm thinking about, a football team or a basketball team or a soccer team. They get in the film room and before we turn it on, I want my leaders first to admit what's going on. Is that the sequence?
that's exactly right. Yeah, you'll come into the room, and for the first 5 minutes, people will be sitting down and they'll just be reflecting on the flight, thinking about it. That may have their photograph, Google Maps of the thing, and then the first debrief themselves. How did I do? What were things? And they go through their list of maneuvers and just try to capture, because you're not taking notes while you're up there in the air. So first debrief yourself, and that's a great point because that prepares you to have a really productive conversation. If you start the debrief and everybody's just sitting back passively, then you're not going to get the real juice that you really need. Uh, and then you're absolutely correct. After this first phase, then we will go into the detailed debrief, and essentially the flight surgeon will read his notes or her notes about where was the placement of the maneuver, what deviations did they see, and then give a grade for the maneuver, and then we will watch the videotape. Everything is videotaped, and we'll go through the video and just frame by frame sometimes, as we discuss, because a lot of times, what appears to be a mistake by one person is actually influenced because of somebody else. And so we just try to get to the root cause of what happened, why did it happen, what can we learn from it, and then most importantly, how do we apply this tomorrow or on the next flight so that we don't. But it really sends a powerful example that mistakes are going to happen. We're human, right? But as long as you're trying as hard as you can, as long as you are not negligent, that you were prepared and you did your very best, then we're going to learn from that and we're going to do our best not to let it happen again. So we're looking for people to own their performance, no excuses. And then you'll hear people say, I made a mistake here. I'm going to fix it for tomorrow. It's pretty cool. And then at the end of the debrief, we'll go around the room for any final comments. And this is really important, and we do this pretty much in all our meetings, just to make sure that if somebody has something they want to share, whether it was on topic of what we were talking about or just something else that they want the rest of the team to know, they know they're going to get a chance to talk. And so we'll go around the room and people will make any final comments that they'd like to make. And as you just mentioned, we always end our comments with the very same words in order to remind ourselves that no matter how tough a day we had, um, the we are just appreciative, the gratitude of being part of such a great group of people. We always end our comments with the same words, and that is simply, I'm glad to be here. Now, some of your, I'm sure many in your audience are sort of rolling their eyes about this. And I too, when I showed up as a leader, this is how we do things. Okay, here we go. But I found it to be really, really powerful. The old saying is, do actions and words affect emotions or emotions affect actions? And it's really both. It goes in both directions, right? So when you just say those words, I don't know, it changes the chemistry, right? It allows you to, and then when you hear other people in the room that you admire and respect, when you hear them say, "I'm glad to be here," it's contagious. It's really good. It makes a difference, that's for sure.
So take me back, take me inside that room. Like give me a sentence or two, George, that you would have said and how you would have ended the sentence with those five words. Just give me a brief, like what would that sound like?
Yeah, so maybe I'm ending it saying, well, we learned a lot here today. For me, I realize, my roles are getting a little bit ratchety. So, tomorrow I'm going to make sure that I pay close attention when we're doing the diamond roll and the delta roll, that I build the roll rate to 90 degrees and then sustain that roll rate through the remainder of the maneuver. And I'm gonna fix that tomorrow, and I'm glad to be here. And then number two would do the same thing.
Well, that's so cool. I love this because it's not just obviously aviation like we talked about off air. This is high performance teams. These are lessons, and I think the big lesson here, if I can just continue to kind of pull threads, is
Sure.
the ability to give feedback, the ability to admit when you're wrong, the leaders to be able to go first. That's a huge skill, and I think coaches out there, a lot of coaches tuning in, George, the coaches that can provide a platform in a room for that to be normal. I think that's the key. It's the rooms that like the kids or the athletes don't want to speak up, and they're like, oh, am I gonna lose playing time if I speak up, or what's gonna be the consequence if I do this? It's the coaches that can create the environment, and once you do that 1 or 2 years, like you said, it just kind of becomes the way we do things.
Right. Yeah. I talked to groups about the fact that in all the high performance teams I've been a part of, whether it was at the Blue Angels, at Top Gun, in a fighter squadron in combat, um, you know, it was, candor wasn't something that we liked to have. It was a strategic imperative, right? And I could tell the level of trust in a room of people, if they're talking about something that's really important to them, I can tell in just a few minutes how much trust there is among that leadership team or organization, right? Because too often we think, oh, we're professional. So the conversation is very courteous and so forth and calm and so forth. But that's not what I found. If we're talking about something that's really important, it was loud and it was passionate. But the key is it wasn't personal, but it was your duty. If you saw something that was different than where we were headed or the decision we were about to make, it was your duty to express that so we can get all the points of view, all the ideas on the table before we make a decision and so forth. And so, but the leader has to set the example. The leader has to be willing to be vulnerable to feedback to himself because you get feedback from people and you may get it once, and depending upon how you react to that, you may never see the truth again, right? So I had to be willing as the leader to accept the feedback as it came and remember that it was a gift. I write about a story in the book about my first week with the team. And man, I mean, I had a lot of flight experience, but I didn't have any Blue Angel experience. I was coming in as the leader, right? And so at the end of the first week of training, flying 2 and 3 times a day, I'm pretty tired and I'm sitting down for the debrief there, and I remember my bucket is full after about 3 or 4 maneuvers. And as we get into subsequent maneuvers, I don't have any significant recall about how I did. And my guys keep bringing it to me. Okay, boss, here you did here, and then over here you did this, and then this. And finally, I said, "Look, you guys, can't you see I'm trying as hard as I can here?" And I'll be forever grateful. My wingmen, and we are wonderful friends today, lifelong friends. But at that moment of truth, they looked at each other, and one of them said, "Yeah, boss, we know you're trying hard, but we don't grade on effort. We grade on performance. And in these 5 maneuvers, you suck. You gotta, you can't, we can't get in there unless you stop waggling your wings or whatever I was doing, right?" And I had to take a deep breath, but then I looked around the room, and what I saw were my teammates wanted so badly for us to be a really great team. And by definition, we can't be a great team if I as a leader don't fly well. I mean, I could have a good day and my team might have an average day, but my team would never have a great day if I as a leader didn't have a great day. And so when I saw that, right, that they weren't bringing me this to score points or to make themselves look good or make me look bad or whatever. No, they were bringing it to me because they wanted so badly for us to be really good. So that was a bit of a mindset shift for me. And once I saw that the intent of their feedback was really, really a gift, then we went to a different place because, so.
That reminds me of Doc Rivers, NBA Hall of Fame coach, said this: average players don't want to be coached. Good players want to be coached. Great players want the truth. And I was like, wow, that's exactly what you're talking about, where I want to be coached and I want the truth. Don't beat around the bush. Give me the truth. Am I playing this week? Am I not? What do I need to get better at? And they're constantly seeking that out. I want to turn the page here. One thing that I thought was really cool, YouTubing and searching the Blue Angels, was the visualization component. I'm a mental performance coach by nature, so I talk a lot about visualization. The video is phenomenal. Talk to me a little bit about where and how visualization fits in your guys' preparation.
Right. So it's a big part of it. So before every flight, we have a pre-flight briefing, and that briefing includes chair flying, what we call chair flying. And so um, you see, we're flying so close together. Um, Out in the fleet, when you're flying off the aircraft carrier, we take a lot of pride in not talking on the radios unless it's really important. Um, and we can do that in fly formation because we're flying farther apart. And so the wingmen can fly reactively, right? They can watch the leader move and then they can match and then off we go, right? But the Blue Angels, we are flying so close together with wing overlap, literally 2 feet apart. And so if the wingman waited to see the lead turn or climb or whatever and then react, it wouldn't work. We'd bump into each other. So I, as the leader, don't make, I don't move either hand, either the control stick in my right hand or the throttles in my left hand, without first giving them sort of a command of preparation and then execution on the radios. And so we're all trying to get into the same rhythm, maneuvering, moving the controls at the same time so that we can fly as one. And so in the brief, I will, as we chair fly, I'll make all the radio calls that I'm going to make during the show in order to accomplish the maneuvers. And the wingmen are going to close their eyes and they're going to think and they're going to try to match me. And we'll all be thinking about what are our checkpoints, what power settings, all the things that we need to do in order to fly together. And when we this was another thing that when I joined, I hadn't really done this much before. And and it's funny, the old guys from back in the 50s and 60s, they didn't do this. And so they give us a hard time about, oh, you guys going to have a seance again or that sort of thing. But I knew that I was always would fly better out in the air when I flew it the first time at the table, because I'm not sure your brain can tell the difference, right? And it gave me a chance to make mistakes. Oh, yeah, I need to remember this. Oh, yeah, I remember now, this checkpoint or whatever it might be. And so it helped to get me into the moment so that when I climbed in the jet and the canopy came down, I am fully focused in the moment, ready to go. And it significantly improved my performance. I know that.
So it sounds like a lot of confidence there, feeling like I've been here before. I talk to that with the athletes all the time is maybe you're going to an away game, an unknown environment. Can we put ourselves in there so that when we get there, it's not a huge surprise factor? And sometimes Michael Phelps talked about it when he was in his reign was he visualized when things went wrong. What am I going to do? How can I correct it in my mind? Did you ever go through that route too? Or is there any nuances a part of that visualization process?
Oh yeah. One of the big rules is you never you never show frustration on the radios. And we look at a videotape. I don't know if they still do, but we did on my team, and it was a videotape of a mishap where Blue Angel number two that year was struggling with a maneuver. And he was in the debrief, he was being, getting the feedback on he was struggling with this maneuver. And and they were in winter training and they were doing the maneuver over and over and over again. And you can hear his voice, even though all he's saying is his call sign. He's checking in before each maneuver. He's responding to the leader's call. Simply each pilot checks in with their call sign, and that gives us a radio check to know that, because you don't want to be out there with somebody who either you can't hear them or they can't hear you. But just saying his call sign, you can hear him uh, communicating his frustration with himself on this. And at one point, he hit the leader, and he had to eject, and the leader got his damaged airplane back safely on the ground. But out of that came a rule that you do not express frustration on the radios. And this goes back to my earlier comment about, you know, does do actions affect emotions or do emotions affect actions? And again, it's both. And I remember in practice there one day, I was trying to perfect a maneuver and I made a mistake. I didn't set my wings the way I wanted to or needed to. And so as we're setting up for the next maneuver, I know my wingmen are wondering, okay, where's his head at? Is he focused on that maneuver or is he getting ready for the next one, right? And so I knew, okay, I can't be show any frustration or anything. And so when I came up on the radios for my next call, I made sure it was positive and, confident. And I noticed my whole attitude changed. So I became a
So George,
believer.
take me on that radio, man. What did you say? What does that sound like?
Okay, so the maneuver that I wasn't happy with was called the diamond aileron roll, where we come in as the four planes together, and on my call, ready, hit it. We all do a max stick deflection aileron roll individually, and then get back together close as we go behind the crowd. Well, I need to, when I do that maximum aileron roll, I need to make sure when I come out of it, my wings are absolutely level in relationship to the horizon. Otherwise, I'm going to be veering one direction or the other into one of the wingmen. And so on this day, when I set my wings, they weren't exactly level, and I drifted a bit into one of the wingmen. And so I wasn't happy with that. Again, it was something that I was working on. I hadn't mastered that maneuver just yet. So then I call for a turn, coming left, a little pull, and we go behind the show line in order to set up for the next to do it again. So now, as we're behind the getting ready to set up the maneuver, the next thing my next radio call is we're behind the crowd setting up the diamond aileron roll, and then each of the wingmen respond In this one, my wingman was Kato, Gucci, and Scooter. And so they acknowledge with their call signs. So we come out of the maneuver. I'm not happy. Coming right, a little pull. We come around, and then okay, I can't show my frustration for that. I got to flush that maneuver. So I just come up on the radios and say, we're behind the crowd setting up the diamond aileron roll. Just very positive, succinct, boom, just business, business, business. I'm looking forward. And they all acknowledged, and it was interesting. I don't know whether I imagined it or not, but in their acknowledgement was very positive. And just the way they said it, I'm getting the message, we're with you. Let's go. Let's get this one right. It's very cool.
It's powerful not only on what I'm hearing is it's not only the words, but also the tone. The tone is
Mm.
important too, where it depends not only what you say, but how you say it. And it's not only what you say to yourself in your jet, but also what you're hearing across the radio. Huge, huge lesson there for teams out there is not only what you say, but how you say it.
Oh yeah. And I could tell, like I say, unless it was something unusual, all the guys in the show would just typically be responding with their call signs. And I could tell just the way they said their nickname, their call sign, I could tell what kind of a day they were having out there because you communicate tone very much as the actual words you say. Yeah.
What a cool rule. Don't show frustration or don't not don't show it. Don't talk with a frustrating tone. That's cool. I think a lot of people can take that with them. I want to talk a little bit about trust. We've gone through so much stuff here. I know one of your favorite topics is trust. The book is phenomenal. Before we get into a couple of my questions on the C's, could we go through? I thought this was really interesting. Trust 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. How do we layer trust? What does that kind of look like? Very interesting to me.
Yeah, so I believe, trust isn't binary. It isn't you either have it or don't have it. It's a continuum, right? And we are at different places on that continuum with everybody, each person that we have a relationship with. And so trust 1.0, I believe, is sort of, I call it your garden variety trust, right? You're driving down the highway and somebody's coming the other direction and you're trusting that they're going to stay on their side of the yellow line, right? Or you hire somebody and they've had a certain amount of experience or training and you just expect them to perform to a certain level. But, you're going to keep an eye and make sure that, they're performing what you need. And this was when I showed up at the Blue Angels. Uh, I didn't, as I mentioned, I didn't have any Blue Angel flight time. So my wingmen, you know, they trusted me to fly my jet safely, but we were flying farther apart and we were flying higher as we started because I hadn't earned their trust yet. And so then as I worked really hard during winter training, we got to trust 2.0. And that is sort of where we live most of our lives. It's a conditional trust, right? If you do A and B, I'll trust you with C.
Mhm.
Or it's selective trust. I'll trust you over here, but I'm not trusting you here, right? Um, and so I just kept working really hard. And by the time we came out of winter training and started the air show season, I was at trust 3.0 with my wingman. And that is when you've reached a point where you've invested in the relationship over time in these five areas that I'm talking about, you get to a point where the other people in the relationship, for me, it was my wingman, they feel, I trust you, period. Trust 2.0 sort of feels like a contract, right? Somebody walks in the room that you have conditional trust in, you're wondering, okay, what's going to happen here? Um, what do they want from me? Trust 3.0, I believe, is a covenant. I mean, you get to the point in the relationship where it is so strong that when somebody walks in the room that you have unconditional trust in, you get up and you want to meet them because you're thinking, what do they have for me? This is going to be really cool.
So 1.0 basic trust, 2.0 conditional and selective, 3.0 is unconditional trust. So all of us listening, we want to get to 3.0. I would assume that one major component is time. We need to spend time with each other to build that. Maybe one question would be, can we speed that process up? And maybe speed's not the right word. Maybe another way to ask this, George, is there another way to get there besides time that we can invest in maybe a shorter term?
Well, it always takes time.
Hmm.
Uh, but you with intention, you can get there faster than you would if you didn't have intention, right? So if your goal is to build this, and of the five C's of trust, the one that most relates to this is connection. And and Stephen Covey in his book, The Five Dysfunct or not, the Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, he says, I think really profoundly, you can be efficient with things, but you can't be efficient with people. And too often we are trying to be so efficient in our lives and getting through our to-do lists and so forth that we try to be efficient with the people that we are working with, right? And you can't. You have to slow down and you have to go deep in order to build this level of connection to the point where they believe that you understand them. You get them. You understand their stories. You understand what their goals are, what their challenges are, and so forth. And so it does take time, but if you're intentional about it, and I tried to describe some ideas in the book on how you can build connection, if you do that intentionally, then you can do it as fast as, you know, possible. But it there's no getting around it. It takes time.
And that pursuit in your guys' field was a little bit different when you had 50% new, 50% old, in air quotes, or seasoned, I should say. That those 50% that are new, we need to be really intentional about building 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0. That's where we need to be intentional. And I like what you said there. I think it's not something that we're supposed to speed up. What I meant by that, George, is I'm thinking about, is if a team comes together, a high school team, and we have this one season, we really only have like 3 months that we're working together. The
Mhm.
idea isn't to speed it up. This is another great lesson here that I'm learning in real time. It's how can we be intentional about putting in time and space for us to build our connection rather
Right.
than we just got to trust each other right now. We just got done with 2 days. It's like, man, no, it's about being intentional about displacing times that we can build connection.
That's right. And it's a two-way street. I mean, each person needs to realize that their objective is to earn the trust of their other people. The trust can't be bought, it can't be demanded, it can't be expected, it can't be coerced. It's a gift, and you have to earn it from the other people in your life. And so that should be the intent of the people, all of them, is that, hey, I'm trying to earn your trust from everybody in the team. And then, and similarly, people have to be open to when somebody earns it and they're trying hard and so forth, is that you need to be receptive to that, right? And then together, you get there, yeah, because trust, some people think it's just sort of a nice to have thing that you put really talented, smart people together and it's going to come. But we all know wonderful examples in the sports world in particular where you can put some really talented people together, but man, they don't mesh, right? Um, and every high performance team I've been a part of, trust wasn't just something nice to have. It was a strategic imperative. We recruited for trustworthiness. We trained to build it every day. If you had it, you got rewarded and promoted. And if you lost it and couldn't get it back quickly, you were either sidelined or gone because we just could not have somebody in the organization who we didn't have a really high level of trust in.
So our 5 C's here are character, commitment, competence, connection, and communication. I got one more for you. I'd really like to dive into the second C, which is commitment. And this might be a kind of a selfish question, but in my own walk of working with teams, George, I've found there to be a lot of friction when there's a varying level of commitment, whether it's a team or even the staff, the coaches. I've put a
Mhm.
lot of thought into this concept, and I think it kind of dates back to like in middle school days when you're in a school group project and somebody's more committed and they do more work, and then everybody gets the same grade. But even though the grades are the same, the feelings afterwards are not. So I'm curious if we can dive into this, whether it's through your personal experience working with teams of the Blue Angels or your consulting work, anything like that. How do you go about this delicate issue of varying levels of commitment?
Right. So my team, when I got to the Blue Angels, they were absolutely convinced from day one that I would show up to lead them with a smile on my face whenever the sun was shining and the sky was blue and the air was smooth. But what they wanted to know was, because they knew that during the season we were going to go through some figurative or literal storms. And what they wanted to know was, are you going to be with us playing at your best when we have to take a punch? And not only are you just going to show up, but are you going to bring your A game and are you going to lead it? You're going to be the best leader you can be to get us through the storm to success on the other side. Because the reality of life is that you're either in a storm now or you just came out of a storm or you're getting ready to go in the next one because that's just the way life is, right? And so I believe that commitment, uh, comes from a very deep, a very intense, and a very clear sense of purpose. In the military, we call it mission. When you know what mission you're on and why it's really important, that's what gets you up off the ground, or you're willing to take a punch, or you, as we've talked about earlier, you just can't get enough feedback in order to get better because you want to make sure that we're going to win and succeed. And so that's what we try to make sure that everybody understands the mission and why it's important. Because, for coaches and leaders and so forth, too often we're really good about talking about the what and the how. Here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to do it. But too often we are reluctant to talk about the why.
Mm.
Why is this important? Why does it matter? Why does it matter to you? And when you can get people to understand why it's important and that why working for you or playing for you or going through this experience is going to get you where you want to go in the next 2, 3, 5 years in your life. You don't have to motivate people. You just have to train them. You have to resource them. You have to give them the benefit of your wisdom and feedback and then get out of the way because they're just a soul on fire getting after it.
What does it look like? This is probably very situation based, but what does it look like when one player on the team, one pilot on the crew is not on that same level of commitment? I'm sure it's very situation based and you need a little bit more detail, but what's kind of your process?
Well, you're gonna see it, right? There's gonna be something is gonna happen where either that person didn't show the level of commitment that was required, either shows up late, doesn't live up to our standards of excellence in one area or another. It's gonna manifest itself in the behavior. So then you need to have a conversation about it. And you need to sit down with them and go, here's what I'm observing, right? You don't want to get in their face and start, pointing fingers and here's judging them, right? Labeling them. Because there may be something that you're not aware of that's going on with them, right? So you sit down with them and you go, look, here's what I'm seeing. Man, you're not showing up on time. And when you do, your uniform looks disheveled or whatever it might be. And then, so what's going on? Tell me about it. And they're going to give you either a bunch of excuses or whatever it might be. But then you need to come out of that with a shared understanding that your performance is not what we need it to be. And therefore, you need to remedy this. And then you give them a certain amount of time to step up and to raise their game to the level of commitment that you require. And if they don't, then they have to go or they get transferred to a position that allows for that, right? And and that usually works pretty darn well. I mean, the person self-selects. Sometimes you say, look, this team is no longer a good fit for you. And that's okay. Let me help you go somewhere else, which is a better fit. Because what I always try to remember when I'm leading a team and trying to do corrective performance correction and so forth is everybody around is watching and they're wondering, who, if I'm not measuring up somehow, am I going to be treated fairly and given the opportunity to raise my game in order to, you know, be part of the team? And so you have to give that person the opportunity to fix themselves if you have the time to do that. Um,
Mm.
but then when you make the decision because they don't meet, and then you have to cut them or move them on or whatever it be, everybody else knows that, hey, they were given a fair chance and it just didn't work out. They just didn't play at the level that we need them to. That makes
The
sense?
the big lesson in there to me is first, let's make sure we're all on the same mission. Let's clarify what the expectations are beforehand. And then if something does come awry, then we're going to sit down and have a conversation. I'm going to ask questions first. I'm going to give you a chance to kind of come back. And then also, you got to be okay as the coach or leader out there to kind of cut it. And if it's not working, is you got to be able to move forward and move on because it's the greater purpose that's in front of you.
Right. And when you as a leader or the coach aren't taking that action, then they're tapping their toes going, hey, what's going on here? Because the really good people, they want the accountability. And to your comment here, it just struck me that we have to make sure we're very clear about the expectations. Sometimes we're not. And people are guessing, what do they really want from me here? And if you don't give it to them, then there's always this uncertainty and people are walking on eggshells and, it affects the culture.
George, it's been awesome. There's so many lessons in here. I'm going to close down with a kind of a similar question I end all my podcasts with. I have a lot of coaches that tune into the show, George, and a lot of coaches in the sports world. And so I'm curious if we could end with a piece of advice for sports coaches specifically. Sports coaches out there that are looking for a high performing, high trust team. What's the piece of advice or pieces of advice you would give them as we close down today?
Well, first, I would say for those that are out there that are dedicating time and effort to being a coach, to helping young people learn life lessons, I've got great admiration and regard for them. And I would say, we have to. It sounds it's going to be a beating a drum here, but I think if you can use building trustworthiness as a key uh, trustworthiness as a core value that you first demand of yourself and then expect of the other members of the team. Uh, my experience is this even the sky's not the limit on how far you can go and take your team to places that nobody ever expected at the beginning that you could get there. And it doesn't happen quickly. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes intention. But if you do this work and you do it every day, it's magic whenever it all comes together.
Well, awesome. George, this has been a lot of fun. How can my listeners follow you, support you, get the book, etc.? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, the book is listed on Amazon, and you can get the Kindle version or the hardback or paperback version. I'm hoping to do an audible version here before too long. Uh, my website is georgedom.com, and there's more material on there, some video clips and some things. And you can contact me through the website anytime, and I love to hear from people on how I can help them and hear about their benefit of the lessons that they've gotten. So it's great.
George, thanks a lot. A lot of wisdom in this conversation, a lot of great pieces of advice for teams, whether you are a fifth grade basketball team or you're a professional team. There's a lot of great stuff in here. Thank you for taking the time.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thanks very much. I appreciate it.